Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, welcome to Point of View, the Millennial Round Table. I am your guest host today, Chelsey Yeoman, and we have an incredible show lined up for you today. First, around the Millennial Round Table, we have Liberty McArtor. She is a freelance writer, of course, for Point of View. She's no stranger to the show. She lives in North Dallas with her husband and two sons, an almost one-year-old, so she's about to be in toddler heaven, as I call it, which is sometimes sarcastic. But thank you for joining us today, Liberty. I'm glad you're on the show.
Thank you, Chelsey. I'm excited about our conversations today.
Wonderful. Well, we also have joining us Pastor Joshua Barnes. He is a pastor from New Hampshire with a master's degree in theology. He is the creator of The Bible Explained, which is an incredible YouTube channel designed just to help us out with tough questions about biblical topics. And I'm so grateful to welcome him to the Millennial Roundtable today. Thanks for joining us, Pastor Barnes.
Yeah, it's such a privilege to be here.
Well, we have a jam-packed show. We're going to start with some religious liberty rights issues and a case that recently came out of the Supreme Court that, in a very rare moment, you would think, on the religious liberty issue, the Supreme Court agreed on something in an 8-1 decision, which I think hopefully all of us can get on board with. So we're going to unpack that first. We're also going to, of course, talk about the Judge Brown Jackson hearings and the Senate confirmation on her to the Supreme Court. And then, of course, we'll discuss Ukraine. We can't talk about what's going on in the world without discussing Ukraine, as well as some abortion news that I'm sure you all have been reading about or hearing about in your headlines, near and dear to my heart as I work at Human Coalition, advocating for women who are pregnant and need help. So we have a full show today. You'll be able to follow along with our articles today by going to pointofview.net online. And then, of course, as always, you can watch us live on Facebook at Point of View Radio. So you guys, if you are ready, we're going to just dive right in and discuss a case that I thought was really interesting. You all know that both Liberty and I worked on religious liberty cases in different realms through First Liberty Institute, which is an incredible organization that is dedicated to defending really all faith backgrounds from their religious liberty rights. And so when I saw this Supreme Court case come down, I wanted to make sure to highlight it today. The Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, upheld the religious liberty of a Texas death row inmate. And in that 8-1 decision, they ruled that John Ramirez should be allowed to have his Southern Baptist pastor pray aloud over him and lay hands on him as he is executed. And this is such a difficult topic, and, something when we're thinking about inmates on death row, who really have had almost all rights stripped from them as a part of their imprisonment and sentences. Even some who are imprisoned are no longer even allowed to vote. And so, I thought it was really a poignant moment to point out that even when you lose certain rights in society because of actions of as part of your imprisonment, you don't ever lose your religious liberty rights. And that's because religious liberty rights are a part of our natural God-given rights, and they're highly protected. And so I wanted to take this as a moment to just really highlight how important these rights are, that even in some of the most dire consequences anyone could face, you still have a right to your sincerely held religious beliefs. And so what happened is The Fifth Circuit essentially said that he could not have his pastor there with him in these final moments to pray over him and lay hands. And they appealed that all the way up to the Supreme Court. And ultimately, he is going to be allowed to have that moment in the last moment. So, Liberty, I'm going to start with you. When you read this, was there anything particular about this article or case that struck you from a religious liberty standpoint?
Well, Chelsey, just like you said, our right to religious freedom is God-given. So that, and our founding fathers said the same thing. The reason we have religious liberty in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights is because every person must be able to worship God according to their own conscience. And so, as a Christian believer, we hope for redemption, right? Even up until the very end, we celebrate those redemption stories of people who are imprisoned, even on death row, people repenting and turning to the Lord. And then in those final moments when, they still have to serve their sentences and pay the consequences for what they've done on this earth. But, on death row, that's when they're passing from this earth into the heavenly realm. And so, to say, no, you can't have your pastor or your spiritual leader with you to kind of guide you in that moment as you're facing death. Because, that I think is wrong and morally wrong and unconstitutional. And so I was really glad for the outcome in that.
I was too. I thought it was a really humanizing moment because no matter what someone has done in their lifetime, repentance and redemption is always available. And no one can be stopped from accessing the Lord through prayer or through any means. And I thought that it really humanizes how important I think religious liberty is to society, because I think it gets a bad rep in the news these days. I mean, I think people are very skeptical these days, especially the millennial generation, which of course we are, but the newer generation, the Gen Z generation, there's a definite sense of skepticism and relativism that has overtaken our culture and made really religion the bad guy in the room, because religion does believe in truth and falsehood, and does believe in right and wrong. And at the end of the day, religion is something that's it's from your heart to the Lord, and your belief system. It's something that's ingrained in your conscience and your own soul. And it's a human thing between you and the Lord. And I thought that this really highlighted how important religion is, not in the cultural sense of what religion is as an institution, but just to humans and to humanity, that in your final moments, there's peace and comfort and hope to be had through our beliefs and God and his goodness, even in the midst of facing death. And so I want to turn from a pastoral standpoint to you, Joshua, and just see if you agree with that, or what your thoughts were from even just your stance as a pastor.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you could just call me Josh. That's fine. That's what my friends call me.
I'm going biblical with it. So.
Right, there you go. I think this is just an incredible case. I think it might be even bigger than we realize, because my understanding of what took place here is that one of the big things that it wasn't so much that they didn't want the pastor to be there. I think that's pretty customary, but rather it was that the pastor wanted to pray aloud and touch him as well, put his hand on him as he was being executed, which is a very comforting thing. I can understand how some people don't want someone on death row to be comforted. They want him to suffer justice. But I think the big problem, I think the real issue, the reason that people were really perturbed about this and wanted to prevent this, especially in the government, is because of that praying aloud thing. That the idea of being outspoken about your faith, about making other people uncomfortable about being a believer in Christ, is under attack in America and around the world. We from our church, we support missionaries who go to countries where there's just
yes, Josh, you're so right. More on that when we get back after this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
An education bill in Florida has created lots of controversy, partially because the critics have never read the bill and believe the slogans used to condemn it. The bill has the title Parental Rights in Education, but you may never have heard that name for the bill because LGBTQ critics and most of the establishment media only refer to it as the Don't Say Gay bill. For the record, the words Don't Say Gay don't appear anywhere in the bill in any form. The so-called Don't Say Gay bill doesn't actually say Don't Say Gay, but activists have learned that if you say something long enough, then it becomes the public perception. The bill prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender in early years of grade school. Proponents see it as a common sense response to leftist indoctrination in the schools. Some argue that a first grade lesbian teacher should not be prevented from talking about her sexual involvement with her partner. I would argue that heterosexual, homosexual, or transgender teachers should not be sharing their intimate information with their students. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area with a homosexual uncle, but I didn't need to know all the details of him and his partner when I was in the first grade. Young children should be protected. Unfortunately, the CEO of Walt Disney Company believed the mischaracterization of the bill and called Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to express his concern. The call did not go well for Disney. Governor DeSantis later said in a video that companies that have made a fortune off of being family-friendly need to understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their kids' kindergarten classrooms. Here's my recommendation for CEOs of Coca-Cola, Disney, and other corporations. Before you object to bills about childhood education and voter integrity, take the time to read the bills. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to Point of View, the Millennial Round Table. Josh was just breaking down for us, I think, a really incredible point on this case we're discussing that came out of the Supreme Court. In an 8-1 ruling, the Supreme Court agreed on something. They agreed that a prisoner, even in his final moments before execution, had the religious liberty right to have a pastor pray over him out loud and lay hands on him. That even when your own right to life has been taken from you, you still have rights of conscience because those are, after all, God-given rights. And so, Josh, go ahead and continue what you were saying to us about the importance of the actual practice of praying out loud and the need to defend that in the public realm when, we're told that the right to religion is really just a right to worship in your homes and in your pews, but don't bring that into the public realm. But we know it's actually a much broader right than that, isn't it?
Yeah, Chelsey, and just to be clear, or to be fair, when you throw to a pastor right before a break, it's just never going to happen. It's just never going to work. We are long-winded by nature. But no, yes, exactly. And we were having this discussion in our church recently. Some of the members were talking about missionaries that we support from our church who are going to countries around the world where they're allowed to be there, but they're not allowed to actually audibly try to convert anyone to Christianity. And so they have to kind of do that secretly. And this is coming to America. And this is really the goal of the left. Sure, religious liberty, keep that in your house, but we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to know about it. We don't want you to indoctrinate children with it. We want to control that so that we can eventually eliminate it. And having someone speaking out loud and praying out loud, I think is really where they got hung up and really where they had a problem with it. And so I think it's a great victory.
It is a great victory for a lot of other reasons as well. We discussed a little bit earlier about how religion, I mean, it's a humanizing thing. I think religion, we talked about, kind of gets a bad rap in the public realm. And to say, like, actually, religion, our faith gives us hope and it gives us strength. And God works with us in those moments. And so to like recognize the goodness and the importance of our faith through our justices, I just love seeing that. I know, Liberty, you worked at First Liberty Institute alongside with me, so you're probably familiar with the phrase RLUIPA, but I did want to explain to you, all you listening today, a little bit about these religious liberty rights and where they come from, in case your rights are ever infringed, that you can recognize it and have strength to understand your moment to defend your own religious beliefs is always now. Because they are taken away as quickly as people fail to defend themselves. And so you, of course, have your First Amendment rights, which is your right to the free exercise of religion. And that is really broad and amazing. But states, believe it or not, the government still tries to infringe on your rights, even when the Constitution is there to keep them at bay. And so states and the federal government have passed additional statutes to really bolster those rights when they are attacked. And that's RLUIPA is one of them, and RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is one of them. But this case really revolved around RLUIPA, which you may or may not have heard of. It's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And this statute essentially said, we noticed that local government zoning boards will try to zone churches out. Just your local city councils can zone churches or religious activities simply out of existence. And the other area that people see a deprivation of rights is institutionalized persons, in this case, those who are imprisoned. And so that's a little bit of a legal basis for where all of this comes from. But in any arena you're in, whether you're hosting a Bible study that your city council wants you to get parking permits for, or you are imprisoned, you have religious liberty rights. And Liberty, I know that I did a broad brushstroke with that. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I know that Point of View gives a lot of airtime to First Liberty to begin with, but just to add on to what you were saying, an additional resource, there are protection kits, which Chelsey is very familiar with at First Liberty Institute. Yes, but they're great. They really are. Like, if you just want to say get more into the weeds of what your rights are, even if you have a church, potentially facing some of those issues, you can go to firstliberty.org and you can find the protection kits, and those are a great resource to read and know more about your rights.
Yes, I think that we're just seeing so much. If you are watching anything in the news, that our rights are unfortunately more pressured than ever before, whether that's our religious liberty rights or now we're going to be turning to our parental rights. And number one thing that I want you to hear is to have courage. To have courage in the face of a society and a culture that really doesn't believe like we believe and doesn't understand why we believe. Their eyes are veiled, the Bible says, and shielded from understanding why we live the way we do. But we can have courage of our convictions, that our beliefs are good and our causes are virtuous. And I'm, in the pro-life movement and constantly getting asked when I'm in the media defensive questions. I have to tell myself it is good to protect the unborn. I don't have to feel defensive about that. And so your beliefs are right. They are good and they are worth protecting. And I'm proud of this man, Mr. Ramirez, who even in the face of really his criminal charges and the repercussions of all of that is still standing up for his right to pray out loud. We are going to move on to kind of a second area of rights that we've known have been we've all been seeing lately under attack, which is parental rights. You have all heard and I quote, I hate to say it, but it's called the Don't Say Gay bill that came out of Florida, which of course, ironically, has nothing to do with the words don't say gay, as Governor DeSantis unpacked for us a few weeks ago. If you didn't see him go off on the media, please go back and watch a video. It's funny. It made me laugh. He just said, read the bill. What does the bill say? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this bill does do and what it doesn't do. And I put up the CNN article on purpose because it is a really great example of how the media can spin anything and has a narrative for anything. And so this bill is essentially a bill that says, we shouldn't talk about sexual issues, overly sexualized issues to children under a certain age, that the ages of kindergarten, first grade, second grade, it's too young, that we should protect children from hypersexualized issues, that really is the place for their parents to be discussing these issues with them. And it's essentially ages 4 to 8 around the third grade. So kindergarten through third grade, we can't teach in schools classroom instruction. This is a quote from the bill. Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. That's what the bill says. And this blew up in the news, of course, as these issues always do, as all sorts of name calling and the critics saying that, schools are anti-LGBTQ plus and all of these things. But I want to talk about what this bill does, because I have a son going into kindergarten next year, and we are doing our best to make sure that he understands, he has to go into the bathroom and can't go to the bathroom outside on a tree. We're at really basic level with a 5-year-old. And I think to introduce concepts about human sexuality so young to these children that are developing their minds, they don't have an understanding of it. They don't have rationalization. They don't have logic. And I would think it would be very confusing, if not inappropriate, just at a basic level for our schools to begin those discussions before parents believe that their child is ready to have a discussion about the issue at all, let alone the LGBT issue. Any human sexuality issue is very, very developmentally early to discuss with children that young. So I'm going to throw it to you first, Josh. I don't know if you have children or how old they are, but do you agree with this discussion that's a really young age to introduce these topics?
Yeah, I actually do have children. My youngest just turned 8 today, so happy birthday to Macy out there. But yeah, this is, oh my goodness, it's really hard to even express the anger that comes to my heart over this, because the story that you shared from CNN really just burns my blood, because the assumption that they make in this story is that this is somehow an offense to the LGBT community. I mean, first of all, I'm not one to have a problem with offending the LGBTQ community. I really don't care. But that's not the issue. What they're doing here is saying that we can't trust parents to teach their children what they need to learn about sexuality. And I'm of the opinion, I don't think that sexuality ought to be discussed in school at all, except for maybe one day in biology in high school, when they're going through that part of the anatomy, you know what I mean? The rest should be left to parents. As far as what parents want to teach their children, You are
so right, Josh. We have to go to one of those breaks, and we're going to come back to you when we get back after this, because it's a real true question of parental rights and where those lines are between the parent and the school. So don't go anywhere. We'll be tuned back after this short break.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story@pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, hi, I'm your guest host today, Chelsey Yeoman for the Millennial Round Table. And I was just speaking to Josh about really these issues we're seeing crop up across our entire country in our public schools, where it does feel that they have been completely overtaken by the progressive agenda. And parental rights are more at the forefront in importance than they've ever been. We've seen school board meeting after school board meeting. I never thought I would see so many school board meeting making national headline news because they're usually fairly dry, but not in the last few years. We're really uncovering that the progressives have taken over our schools, are indoctrinating our children to the point that really it's really escalated into the public eye. But it's been this way for decades. We all know this. We all know that our schools and curriculums have been more liberal than mainstream. And this is just now really coming to a head. And in the state of Florida, which we're specifically talking about today, they passed a bill, as are many other states, to defend young children from hypersexualized topics and graphic discussions in their classroom, ages kindergarten through the third grade. Texas has already done this. We know that Iowa is addressing transgender sports issues in public schools. Georgia and Idaho both have bills, as well as Tennessee and Oklahoma, all to really protect children from sexualized materials. And even as a great example, here in the state of Texas, there's a county that is voted 85% for Trump. It's a very, very Republican-red county, but their librarian, who is obviously public school official, an unelected official, and not really bound to anything in the classroom or parents' rights there, curated a section of books with very explicit sexual content in them that any kid in the school can go up and read. And they pulled those from the shelves. And now, of course, they're getting labeled all kinds of horrific terms out there and demonized in the public realm. But the truth of the matter is, parents have a right to have a say in what their children are exposed to at school, don't they, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, and that's really the point I was trying to get at. The whole assumption here by the left and really by the federal government is that the federal government has to teach children about sex, and really about other things. There are other things in the story about CRT and all this stuff, as if they can't trust the parents to teach it. Well, it's true that they can't trust the parents to teach about LGBTQ because parents, by and large, don't want their children learning about LGBTQ. So if they are going to learn it, they have to learn it in school because they can't trust parents to do it. See, so the whole LGBTQ agenda rests on them forcing it down the throats of children, not by, allowing it to be taught naturally in schools based on what parents want, because parents don't want this. Even if they may vote contrary, they don't want to teach their children about this stuff. They really don't. And so the whole point here that when you see an article like this, when you see stories like this, people are outraged because they think the government, or the left is outraged because they think the government has to be the one to teach children this. Otherwise, nobody's going to teach them that. Nobody wants that to be taught to children.
Right. You raise one additional point that I would add there, Josh, is that not only is it the parents' right to control aspects of what their children are exposed to and learning when they feel like their child is mature, able, parents are in charge of their children's worldview, not the government. This is a vast infringement on our homes and our children. But beyond that, Liberty, one thing I always say that I don't think is very well public knowledge, it's coming to the surface a little bit more, is that one of the ways the FBI has identified that predators can groom children, one of the ways that they start the process of grooming children for sexual abuse is by exposing them to sexually explicit material younger. It normalizes the material, and it's a way that predators groom children. And that came out about 2 years ago on an FBI list for parents to help them identify issues for their children. And here I am thinking we have an entire generation of children who've been exposed to really graphic material and concepts, or even just inappropriate concepts that are, I would say, they're not mature enough to handle, or sexually inappropriate for 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. Really makes them susceptible and vulnerable to predators. And that's the fear, right? That these children they're young and they're not a social experiment. Their innocence should be protected. Liberty, would you add anything to this discussion on those points?
Sure. I think that's, definitely a valid concern, and one that has been brought up in discussions about this bill. And another concern is, beyond the concern about kids being vulnerable to predators, is actually being prone to physical harm. Because one of the things that inspired this bill in Florida is that last year there was a young female student, and her school actually encouraged her to pursue a gender transition without her parents' consent or knowledge. And the parents found out about that, and now they're pursuing a lawsuit. It wasn't that the parents didn't know that their daughter was having some issues with like gender dysphoria, and they had actually informed the school about that themselves, but they thought they were working with the school to deal with those issues that their daughter was having in a manner that the parents were on board with. The girls, mental and physical health counsel were involved with, and then the school just took it and ran with it and started encouraging her to pursue further steps. And this is what we've seen. I've even read reports, again, getting kind of back to the predator thing, where there are some red flags, is schools will accept a young child's proclamation that they're a different gender, oftentimes not tell the parents about it, and then they will treat the child as if they are that gender, even when they do things like go away to school camps or other activities, and put the child with the opposite sex adult in sometimes overnight situations. And these are actual things that have happened. And so if people aren't woken up by the common sense of how unsafe that is and how vulnerable that makes children to abuse, then they're really not thinking with common sense. And so it's crazy that we're even having to protect against this kind of thing, to just say, look, parents have the right to know what their school is teaching their children, but also what they're encouraging them to do with their bodies. And, one thing, I will point out one more thing. A lot of people are saying, look, parents don't have the right to know because a lot of these LGBTQ children, they're at risk of suicide. And I don't want to downplay any mental distress that any individual, especially children, are going through. But this bill, which nobody in the media is going to point this out, but it actually has a provision that if the school administrators and the teachers think that there is a reasonable concern that the parents will actually abuse or neglect their children, then they can take precautions against that. So it's not forcing schools to push their children into an abusive environment back at home. It's just saying the parents have a right to know what's going on.
Yes, and you're so right. We've learned a lot of like secret files under the guise of confidentiality with a counselor, different surveys given to children, even to understand the backgrounds of their religious beliefs at home on the issue. Josh, these are all things that raise concerns. The one thing I want everyone to hear is, as Christians, first, we have to lean in on this issue. We have to run for school board. I mean, I think there's no better example of a reason for Christians to enter into arenas. No arena, including the government, including politics, should be off limits to truth and goodness, and for people to engage and not just, once we defect these arenas, know that someone else is there to take over. Josh, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Chelsey. The government shouldn't be active in the church, but the church should be active in the government. And we have, actually from our own church, we have several members who've run for school board and those sort of things. I think that's important. What we're seeing now, and we'll probably talk about this later when we get to so the Supreme Court and all those sort of things, we're seeing people in the highest office of the land who cannot even answer simple questions on these issues, like what is a woman, those sort of things. That starts somewhere. Somewhere she was in a lower office, somewhere she was appointed to something before that, as a judge and everything. If we don't get good, solid people in the lower offices in the land, we're never going to get good people in the higher offices.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And just to know, I think that the church continue to disciple on these issues and continue to really own, I mean, what we're talking about are belief systems. We're not just talking about a divergence of views on history or divergence of views on, analyzing a piece of art. We're talking about really core values, core worldview issues, and really things that should be taught in the home first, and maybe not at all at school. But in order to do that, we as Christians have to continue to say, we have to teach our own children the truth and what Scripture has to say on these very important issues. And also for the church to continue to say, yes, we have to engage in these arenas. There should be nothing where we don't bring light into darkness, and truth into untruths. We should be able to respond in our own communities. So when we get back after a short break, we're going to continue this discussion. Don't go anywhere. Many more topics ahead of you. You can read on this and more at pointofview.net.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Round Table. I'm your host today, Chelsey Yeoman, and we've really unpacked the last hour quite a few important things going around. We unpacked religious liberty rights case, some parental rights issues out of the Florida bill involving sexualized materials to underage children in the schools there. And we're going to turn now a little bit in this last part of the hour to the Ukrainian war and some refugees that are fleeing the war, and that the United States committed to allowing 100,000 of those refugees to come in. So, of course, you can read about any of these topics or more on pointofview.net. I encourage you to do so. And then in the next hour, we're going to be unpacking Judge Brown Jackson's nomination and some abortion laws that are coming out of Missouri and Idaho that we can all be encouraged about. So now I'll turn again to the United States. Willing to welcome, this article says, 100,000 Ukrainians and other displaced people who are fleeing the conflict in Ukraine. President Biden announced this last Thursday. Most of the displaced Ukrainians we know are going to be staying in Europe, but we do know that there are millions, tens of millions who are fleeing the war there, and really horrible conditions, that there's food shortages and issues that have already obviously been discussed about how that will impact neighboring countries. But for now, the actual crisis, humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, is at an all-time high. As this war drags on, it's now been almost 2 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, as we all know, but it's lasted longer than people anticipated. And so now we do have this situation where we have a refugee crisis in neighboring countries such as Poland and bordering countries such as Germany. We've amassed a lot of troops on those borders to help with the humanitarian crisis there. And now the U.S. has agreed to allow 100,000 to come into our country. You know, my initial thought is, as someone who understands a little bit about immigration law, I did work as an immigration attorney on a voluntary basis for a year or two, really that there is a context for refugees in our law that we allow. I know immigration is a huge topic that we've talked about on the show, but when there is a humanitarian crisis, and when you're talking about women and children who are hungry and cannot return to their home countries, that's the exact reason that our laws allow for refugees to come and seek asylum here. That's what those laws are built around, no matter what country anyone's from. And so I do always like to see when we're willing to come in as a country and open our arms to people who are facing really devastating, deadly circumstances at home. Liberty, I want to just start with you. I know that you read this article. Did anything stand out to you in particular when you read this?
Well, I totally agree, Chelsey, that, you know, in this situation with people who are very vulnerable, fleeing war, that, you know, it's great, I think, to say we have a system in place to welcome refugees. I just read today that as of today, 10 million Ukrainians have been displaced, which is a quarter of their population, and 4 million have already fled the country. So there's, you know, people all around the world needing our help right now. I'm a little skeptical about whether or not this is going to be very successful. I was actually reading something from the Cato Institute that they put out saying essentially that maybe this is just posturing on the Biden administration's part, that there aren't really any practical plans in place to welcome that influx of Ukrainian refugees. And I, you know, that it might not really be practical, that it might be a long time before they get here. So that will be interesting to see how it plays out in reality. You know, I think it would be nice if we could welcome them and help more people stay, but we'll just see whether or not that comes to fruition.
Absolutely, Josh. Did you agree with that, or want to add anything based on when you read this article? What stood out to you about the refugee crisis that's become an ongoing matter?
Good points. I think the thing that stands out to me is that this, well, two things really. First of all, it seems impractical. It seems a bit foolish that we would cart 100,000 people from Ukraine here rather than spending probably less money to take care of them in other countries in Europe. We could probably donate money to help them versus bringing them all the way over here. That seems a little bit impractical. But the other thing that sort of jumped off the page at me as I was reading this article is it says here that they're going to prioritize vulnerable people, which sounds like a good idea, right? I mean, that seems like something we would want to do. Prioritize those who are vulnerable. One of the people that list in this list of those who are vulnerable is those with medical needs. That's great, wonderful. Then it says journalists. And I'm thinking, why are they the vulnerable people, right? And also included in the list is LGBTQI people. And I'm thinking, what in the world does this have to do? Why are we prioritizing the LGBTQI people as the most vulnerable people from Ukraine that we really want to rescue and bring to America? It just seems like a bunch of political maneuvering that doesn't make any sense and is going to ultimately just make more of a mess, because probably these aren't going to be vetted very well. That's usually how it works. And there could be a lot of problems in the population of people that they bring over. But really on a larger point, as a Christian, while I'm frustrated about it, just looking at it politically, I think it's probably a very foolish thing, or at least the way that it's being done is foolish. As a Christian, I'm seeing this and I'm saying this might be bad for our country, but we're commanded to get the gospel to the world, and here part of the world is coming to us. So I say, as a Christian, we should look at this as an opportunity to try to reach these people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, even though I may be very disappointed with what's taking place, because I think it's probably somewhat bad for my country.
I think that's an absolutely great point that you're raising about the church being the church in this instance, instead of relying on the government to necessarily care for 100,000 refugees coming over. There are a ton of religious-based charitable nonprofits who help refugees in crisis, who help them when they come over. If they have a baby, help them get cribs and diapers. I mean, there's a ton of organizations that are wonderful organizations that are vetted and tried and true. You can look in your state and see how maybe you can donate or help, or even doing things like helping them get plugged in with safe housing or their local church, really being a community to people who have been in crisis. I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of these individuals coming over, they've seen war, they've been exposed to a lot, and we can anticipate it to continue to increase, that these Ukrainians have to go somewhere in the interim. And we know that the EU, to answer a little bit of what you were saying, Josh, about why bring them over here, is maxed out on an immigration crisis. We know that Hungary and Germany specifically have had a ton of influx in immigrants over the last 5 years that have crippled their economies to a certain extent. And so this is something, on the world stage that can't be ignored. And it's something that I think you were so right to nail that we as Christians can be involved in. There were several other announcements that I'm going to spend the next couple minutes highlighting out of our President Biden's trip over to Brussels and Europe. They announced a ton of increase in sanctions in lockstep with the EU and the G7. They're going to start new sanctions to help prevent China or other countries from actually assisting Russian banks. We did learn that Russia, of course, preempted a lot of the sanctions by moving over 20% of their bank reserves to gold. And so we're having to account for ways that maybe these sanctions aren't as impactful as we'd hope they would be in applying pressure to Russia. And they also announced things like providing $11 billion for global food security, because Ukrainian wheat, by the way, Ukraine, if you haven't already heard this, is the 7th largest nation in natural reserves. So we've got to protect those reserves and really see what's going to happen in that region. When we get back, we're going to start talking about Judge Brown. So don't go anywhere. We have so much to unpack from her hearings and the ultimate vote next week. So stay tuned.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, hi, I'm Chelsey Yeoman, your guest host today for the Millennial Round Table, and we are joined by an incredible crew today. I've got Liberty McArtor, who you are no stranger to. She, of course, is our freelance writer and always brings such a fresh and wonderful perspective to whatever we're talking about. Thanks for being here, Liberty.
Thanks, Chelsey.
You are welcome. And we again have Josh Barnes. He is a pastor from New Hampshire and has a great YouTube channel called The Bible Explained, which I'm about to go crazy and go watch all of your videos, Josh, because you've had a great perspective today, very insightful, and we're really testing your biblical knowledge in some ways today. Thanks for being with us, Josh.
Yeah, it really is a great privilege to be here. Thank you.
We've had a jam-packed show, so don't forget to go back last hour, and we've discussed parental rights, religious liberty rights, and even a little bit on the refugee crisis in Ukraine. So you can go to pointofview.net and read those articles and, of course, our next topics as well. And you can always watch us live on Facebook at Point of View Radio on Facebook, where you can see the discussion live. But now we're going to turn to some news that I'm really excited about. You guys all know that I am the Texas State Director and National Legislative Advisor for Human Coalition Action. And we are an organization that's rooted in the pro-life movement and helping women who find themselves pregnant and in need of help. We, my sister organization, Human Coalition, has a network of nationwide clinics serving pregnant women seeking abortion, trying to help them understand there are better options and real solutions for them in this moment that they're facing. And then I'm on the advocacy arm, where we work on laws, like I worked on the Texas Heartbeat Act and advocated for protecting lives in the womb. And, I always do that with my constitutional law background. And there have been some incredible innovations in the law, you all know, out of Texas that enabled the Heartbeat Act to actually be enacted. It's the first, what I would say, real meaningful regulation of abortion, real life-saving regulation of abortion in 50 years. And that's thanks to some really brilliant legal minds that aren't mine, but we partnered with them, and it worked out really beautifully in the state. And if you've been listening to the narrative, you may have heard words like this. The Heartbeat Act is controversial, and there's this civil enforcement, mechanism that we've never heard of, and we're worried about it being applied in the gun rights context. And there's all these narratives that are kind of getting away from us on the route that made the Heartbeat Act constitutional. The Supreme Court upheld the Texas Heartbeat Act and its enforcement mechanism as constitutional. So we have the green light there. And then if that wasn't enough, the Texas Supreme Court, up until a few weeks ago, announced dismissed the final portions of the lawsuit from Planned Parenthood, saying that the civil enforcement mechanism is constitutional. So what is it? The civil enforcement mechanism, the whole reason that the Heartbeat Act is the first successful regulation, is it says that the state can't enforce the law. It's really the state tying its own hands, what I think is a rare feat for a government in a state to say, we care so much about protecting innocent human lives that we're going to remove our own power to enforce these laws and give it over to the citizens. And it's making a lot of waves that private citizens can sue abortion providers for conducting an abortion on a child in the womb with a heartbeat. It's that simple. And we've seen it in other contexts, this civil enforcement idea. It's not unique. It's not new. It's just the first time it's been applied in the abortion context. So the reason I want to highlight all of this, which may be more than you ever wanted to know, is that Republican states, because of the narratives that are getting out there about the civil lawsuits, they've been reticent to adopt the Heartbeat Act. We've seen Arkansas, South Dakota, and Florida all had Texas-style Heartbeat Acts filed that could be saving lives today as soon as it's passed. And they pulled those bills down because even in Republican circles, people are saying, oh, this is a new area of law. And so I want to bust that myth. I think that lives could be saved right now if states were willing to be bold and look at the Supreme Court's decision and say, look, we have this in other contexts. For instance, HUD, your housing division, says if you undergo discrimination in your housing or see someone who's discriminating in the housing context, you can bring a lawsuit because that's a really difficult area for HUD to know everything that's happening out there. You bring a lawsuit almost as a whistleblower and help us as the government enforce these laws. So it's really a whistleblower type statute. I am very proud to announce the article you'll see posted online today that Idaho is the first state to adopt a Heartbeat Act modeled after Texas law, and it will be saving lives today. So I know that was quite the introduction. I'm going to start with you, Josh. Idaho signed in a law very similar to the Texas law, a little narrow in certain ways, but is protecting lives. And the governor signed that law in last week. And we're going to start to see in Idaho really what we're seeing in Texas, which is lives being saved with heartbeats, and then also women responding in other ways, like traveling out of states to obtain abortion. So, Josh, I unpacked a lot there for you. Anything stand out that you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a great topic for people who are well versed in legal matters and those sort of things. I'll say that in the theology side of things, there's really no doubt that this is something that is abhorrent to God. This is murder. This is killing children. This is what abortion is. And there is a little bit of a debate in the theological world about incrementalism. Or should we accept heartbeat bills, or should we just go for banning the whole thing altogether? I say this is awesome. I say this is great. We're saving lives. We may not save every life, but we're saving a lot of them. This is a wonderful thing. And man, what's taking so long with these other states? I'm a little bit anxious about that, and I'm wondering what's taking so long. I know you also had a story here about Missouri trying to stop out-of-state abortions, and I think all of these things, as we see these things coming down, these are wonderful. And I'm being cautiously optimistic because I want to see this go forward. I want to see it completely repealed. I want to see Roe versus Wade repealed. And until that takes place and murdering children is banished in our country, I'm not going to stop fighting for it.
Well, I love hearing that, Josh. I think there is this root in our beliefs that is that God creates each human, and each human is in his image and is created with gifts and talents and weaknesses, and a purpose, that the hairs on our head are counted, that he knows the number of tears we've cried. I mean, the importance that God places on humans, his love for us, his willingness to send his son to die for all us, that is all the root of why we're pro-life, because we know that it is a human in the womb and it is alive. And if those two things are true, then they're worthy of defending from conception. And so you're absolutely right that the pro-life... Go ahead.
Not to interrupt, but what you're saying there, God doesn't just put importance on humans. He extends that importance to in the womb in several very important passages of Scripture, Psalm 22 even, where I was God's from my mother's womb. Like it's important to, in case there's any confusion for anyone out there. It is very clear in Scripture, without a doubt, that the value that God puts on the human being includes their time in the womb. That shouldn't be controversial, but it is someplace. someplace.
It is. And, you know, I think that that's where we have to root all of our actions flow from that. My advocacy efforts flow from that. And in this world of constraints, the Texas Heartbeat Act, of course, it didn't go far enough. We went to see every child protected, but it was a good place to start and test this theory of the law that's finally been seen as successful. And the next push will be more.
Has created lots of controversy, partially because the critics have never read the bill and believe the slogans used to condemn it. The bill has the title Parental Rights in Education, but you may never have heard that name for the bill because LGBTQ critics and most of the establishment media only refer to it as the Don't Say Gay bill. For the record, the words Don't Say Gay don't appear anywhere in the bill in any form. The so-called Don't Say Gay bill doesn't actually say Don't Say Gay, but activists have learned that if you say something long enough, then it becomes the public perception. The bill prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender in early years of grade school. Proponents see it as a common sense response to leftist indoctrination in the schools. Some argue that a first grade lesbian teacher should not be prevented from talking about her sexual involvement with her partner. I would argue that heterosexual, homosexual, or transgender teachers should not be sharing their intimate information with their students. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area with a homosexual uncle, but I didn't need to know all the details of him and his partner when I was in the first grade. Young children should be protected. Unfortunately, the CEO of Walt Disney Company believed the mischaracterization of the bill and called Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to express his concern. The call did not go well for Disney. Governor DeSantis later said in a video that companies that have made a fortune off of being family-friendly need to understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their kids' kindergarten classrooms. Here's my recommendation for CEOs of Coca-Cola, Disney, and other corporations. Before you object to bills about childhood education and voter integrity, take the time to read the bills. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Round Table. We were just breaking down really why our faith is so important to understanding the value of human life in the womb. And then I was congratulating Idaho on being the first state to be bold enough and brave enough and courageous enough to follow Texas in passing its own version of the Heartbeat Act. It's something that we want to see every state step into and begin saving lives today. I know that Oklahoma has one filed that would protect life at conception, which of course is always the goal. The Supreme Court has upheld these bills and it's constitutional. And in Liberty, I'm sure you're aware, but the Supreme Court is for the first time in 30 years considering whether to overturn Roe versus Wade. That decision will be rendered this summer, at the end of the summer. And so all eyes are really on the Supreme Court for that. But in the meantime, you know, we should hope that states are willing to still step into the gap for these children, because these are lives that need to be saved today, tomorrow. There should be a sense of urgency here, even while we wait on the Supreme Court, shouldn't there?
Definitely. And regardless of what happens on the Supreme Court, the pro-life fight will continue because then, you know, states will have the authority to set their own abortion laws, according to my understanding. And I think it's really interesting, you know, Josh was bringing great perspective on why we have this spiritual and moral foundation for why life needs to be protected in the womb. But there is a growing consensus, even in secular circles, that the science confirms that the fetus is alive. It's a living human being from the moment of conception. But so much of the culture is just so resistant to that. I thought it always kind of just makes me laugh and roll my eyes when you see the kind of semantic gymnastics that a lot of these people and pro-abortion groups go through, even for, something like the heartbeat bill. Oh, well, it's not really a heartbeat. I think a quote from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is, the word pregnant people, not pregnant women, the word pregnant, or what pregnant people hear is the ultrasound machine translating electronic impulses that signify fetal cardiac activity into the sound that we recognize as a heartbeat. All that to just say it's not really a heartbeat. But they're missing the point, which is very obvious to anybody who has common sense, that it is alive, that it is a living human being, and it needs to be protected. Thankfully, I think more and more people in our culture are seeing that.
I love that you drew some highlights to that, because I was going to go there. The reason I chose this article that is on pointofview.net, where you can go read about this, is so that you could see how absurd, what extents the left goes to dehumanize the child in the womb. They have to go and say that, it's technically it's electrically induced flickering in the heart, because they know that if they acknowledge that it's a child and it's alive, it all falls apart from there. And so they really go to great extents to do that. It is a little bit absurd. I mean, to me, I always say this is the newest clump of cells argument. But what we do know to be true is that 95% of all biologists, not just Christian, not any religious affiliation, secular biologists agree, 95, that life begins at conception. And that is because all 7 factors of life are present at conception. And so that's a little bit of facts for you to take home to your family dinner to discuss. But one of my real goals, too, of bringing this article to light is that even among conservative circles and pro-life circles, we are seeing this pause and this reticence to follow the Texas model because of this civil lawsuit mechanism that's in the bill. And that might sound technical to you, but it's really important to know that 3 states who could be saving lives right now are failing to do so because of that infighting. And so what I want you to do is, no matter what state you're in, go find your local officials, your state representative and your state senator, and call their offices. In Oklahoma, we're waiting on you. Idaho just passed it. But any state you're in, and say, I want you to pass a version of the Texas Heartbeat Act, and you can be saving lives now. That's an encouragement to you, because I think our side needs to be very vocal in this moment that our moral priority is on saving lives. Let the lawyers worry about the rest. So that's my admonition to you if you're listening here. But in other good life-saving news that I want to tout, we see the world sometimes feels like it's falling apart around us, but there are victories to be had on our side, guys, and they're happening now, and we should be encouraged by them. The next state I want to talk about is Missouri. And this is because Missouri looked at, okay, now we have Texas, who is really strongly regulating abortion as a state for the first time in 50 years. What's happening there? Well, the trends are 3. There's 3 trends. Women are going out of state to have abortions. Women are illegally ordering abortion pills online. An international pharmacy is filling them, and they're mailed to her doorstep without any FDA guidance or approval. We don't really know what's in the pills. And then 3rd, women are seeking out birth control in droves. And so Missouri looked at these trends and responded with a bill that is making waves, to say the least. And it is a bill that basically says if an abortion provider provides an abortion out of state on an unborn child from our state, they can be held liable out of state. And this is really groundbreaking. It's the first time, I think, that the abortion providers, this is insider news, guys. I don't even know if I'm allowed to share all this, but I just am, because you guys know where we stand on this issue. But abortion providers, their big fail-safe, if Roe is overturned this summer, is they call it abortion destination cities. They have all these funds set up. They're already doing it, where they're just flying women in droves to get abortions out of state. They make it sound like a resort experience, which of course we all know it is not. It is harmful. It is violent. It is horrible. And then they fly women back. They pay for the abortions. And that's their big plan. They're building these hyper abortion centers. And one is across Missouri state lines, just to cart women to. It's really evil and it's really dark. And so this bill is strategic and designed to say, you can't end the lives of our future citizens. We're going to protect them. We're going to continue to save lives. And it also prevents those international abortion pills from making it to her doorstep safely. And so, in the last couple of minutes of this bottom part of the hour here, I'm going to start with you, Josh. I know we're talking about a lot of legal things here, but even just from your vantage point, what do you think about this Missouri, strategic initiative, this bill that they're looking at?
Well, I hope it's successful, and I think that's that's real. That should all be all of our hopes. But one of the things that jumped out at me was the statement by Professor David Cohen, who sort of argued against it. And he said there's no clear precedent saying that states can't try to regulate out-of-state conduct. And he said what these laws are doing is saying we have a different understanding of how America works, and that understanding is that if you live in this state, we control you everywhere you are. And again, if that's where the pro-life movement makes the argument, we'll probably lose. We have to show that this is not about a woman going and being controlled, her body being controlled when she leaves the state. It's about her murdering her child, who is a citizen of the state, in another state. It's just as if a mother were to take her 5-year-old to the Bahamas and kill the 5-year-old and come back, she would be arrested because she murdered an American citizen, even if it was in the Bahamas. We need to make sure that we're very clear. This is murder. It's the murder of an American citizen or a Missouri citizen. And so Missouri has an interest in banning it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I would highlight almost a different area about this bill. I like that you raised that critique of the bill. It's actually, that's a misunderstanding of the law. So if you go to another state and you're driving around and you get in a car accident and there's negligence involved, there can be a lawsuit brought about that car accident in another state. It's not this sense of lawlessness that just because I'm a Texas citizen and I go to Oklahoma, it's a free-for-all. So all this statute does is it creates a wrongful death cause of action. If a child is killed in another state, you can sue here on behalf of that child for wrongful death against the abortion provider. It has no bearing on the woman whatsoever. It's really the abortion provider's actions that have to be regulated. And I'll take it a step further. I think there's a myth out there that they discuss bodily autonomy and women's rights in a lot of ways, but we know because we serve these women day in and day out who are seeking abortion that they're desperate and they don't feel that they have other options and they need help. And at the end of the day, even when they have an abortion, they come back to us time and time again, and they're harmed by their abortions. Abortion does not help women. It hurts women. Statistics show depression rates are higher. Suicide rates are higher. Drug and alcohol substance abuse rates are higher for women who've had abortions. And then their health for future pregnancies is in jeopardy when they've had abortions. And so we have to continue fighting that narrative that we know is not true, that abortion helps women, and say, actually, abortion harms women. It's in women's best interest to protect them from abortion and to provide them alternative options. Options like safe housing from abusive partners, things like affordable childcare, the church being the church and coming alongside her. If the church came along, all of the 1 in 4 women who have pregnancies are sitting in our pews. This is an issue for us. These are in our church houses. It would be a different world. We're going to go to a break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about Judge Brown Jackson. So don't go anywhere after this short break.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook. at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Round Table. I'm Chelsey Yeoman, your guest host today, and I'm joined, of course, by Liberty McArtor, who is our resident freelance writer, and Pastor Josh Browns, who is pastor and runs the YouTube channel that I think we can all learn from, The Bible Explained. And we've really had a full show today, unpacking lots of issues we're seeing pop up around our country. And we're going to turn now to discuss one I know you've all seen in the news, which is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court to fill that vacancy that came up. We, I think, have all seen her Senate Judiciary Committee hearings from last week. And so we're going to pack a little bit of that in the rest of our time today. Don't forget, you can read about all of these topics we've discussed on pointofview.net or go to Point of View Radio on Facebook and watch us live. And feel free, by the way, to always call in with your opinions. We love to hear your perspective and your point of view. And you can call in anytime and join the discussion. So now we're going to turn to Judge Jackson's hearings. Where we are is she finalized her hearings last week, where she withstood a lot of rightful questioning from really both sides of the aisle about her credentials and qualifications to join the 9 justices on our Supreme Court and fill one of the vacancies there. Where we're at now is that the Republicans are expected to request a delay in the committee's confirmation vote by a week. This happens all the time, nothing crazy there, which means eventually, probably on April 4th, the full Senate would vote on the nomination. And so we're looking here at a confirmation vote in the next week or two before the full Senate. She's continuing to meet with senators on Capitol Hill and try to garner really bipartisan support for her own nomination. And we're looking at all eyes really towards what the final vote. It's going to be 50-50 tied in the Senate if she doesn't get at least Republican votes on track there. So they're looking at Senator Joe Manchin's out of West Virginia. He's a Democrat. They need his vote to make that 50-50 tie in the Senate, so she'll ultimately be confirmed. Without that, though, we still have 3 GOP senators. This is just background for you in case you live in one of these states. If you live in Maine, Senator Collins, South Carolina, Senator Graham, and Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska. They voted in favor of her nomination to the U.S. Appeals out of D.C. Last go around, and we need her not to vote for her this go around. And we're about to tell you why. Because of things that were revealed in her Senate confirmation hearings. A few noteworthy things. One, that she really went soft on child predators and sentencing with those who spread pornography online. That's the first thing. The second thing is she really has no experience to establish her viewpoint on constitutional originalism. She mentioned in her last confirmation hearing before the D.C. Circuit that she had never had a constitutional case before her. So therefore, she couldn't really have a constitutional principle. And since then, she's been on the D.C. Circuit a year or two. She's only had 2 cases that she's ever even drafted an opinion on. And so we have no record to speak of on her stance on constitutional originalism. So I'm going to start there. We're going to start with you, Josh. You know, I know we're talking about a lot of issues that were faced before her. So feel free to dive in on anything about her confirmation hearings that stood out to you.
Well, I mean, both of those, there's 2 things really that stand out perhaps the most. And of course, her stance, her going soft on pedophilia and child predators, that is extremely concerning. But what I find even more concerning, which is shocking that there's something more concerning than that, is her refusal to answer Marsha Blackburn's question about what is a woman. I mean, she asked for a definition, what is a woman? And there was no response. The answer was, oh, well, you know, I'm not a biologist. I can't answer that question, which undermines everything that she stands for. Miss Brown Jackson is supposedly the first woman, a black woman, appointed to the Supreme Court, but she doesn't even know what a woman is. So I guess that doesn't really matter much, does it? I mean, it actually is a really serious issue from a biblical perspective, because we don't have a blind faith. This is what we're accused of. You know, we have blind faith. That's not at all the historic Christianity. Historic Christianity has always been that we have faith on the basis of testimony and evidence and eyewitness testimony. This is what the Bible provides to us. We have evidence. Paul even wrote in 1 Corinthians, look, if the resurrection didn't happen, then we are of all men most miserable. Everything is in vain. We might as well just pack it up and go home, guys, because if it's not really true, it doesn't matter. We have faith that is based on evidence and facts and truth. What this idea is, the idea that you can't define a woman, that women, what you're doing is you're taking the word woman and you're making it mean nothing. If it doesn't mean a human female, then it doesn't mean anything at all. You're redefining it to mean nothing, and then you're saying, oh, I'm a woman. But that means nothing, so you're nothing, and it doesn't make any logical sense. And what we're doing is we're destroying the foundation of truth in our society, which is going to ultimately affect Christianity, because Christianity is based on the basis of logic and truth. And it has ramifications all over.
Yes, Josh, the most ironic part to me about her statement when she was asked, what is a woman? And she said, I'm not a biologist, is that she acknowledged that biology defines sex. So for me, I was surprised that the left actually, I really genuinely, I watched it live. I thought the left is going to have a field day with her. She just tanked her own nomination on the left because they don't acknowledge the truth of biology. Liberty, I will just kind of break this down from, my standpoint as a woman, that what Josh is saying is essentially that women are what we are is becoming obsolete in culture. And it's difficult because as a woman, it's the most offensive anti-feminist thing I can think of is for a man to say all that it requires for me to become you is to purchase body parts or put on makeup. That's really objectifying when you break down what we're talking about. It's incredibly objectifying to a woman to say that that's all it takes to become a woman. And you and I know there's this article we put on pointofview.net that says there are so many things that contribute to us being a woman, but from a scientific biological standpoint, it's in our DNA. It's in our chromosomes. It's ingrained in how God created us, that it's observable at birth, detectable long after death. They can dig up bones from 1,000 years ago and tell whether it was a woman or not, because of the way we're biologically created. And so the first thing I will say is acknowledge what Josh said, which is things like this are dangerous because it makes women obsolete in our culture, and we have a very important role in culture. And then the second thing I'll say to that is it's really anti-feminist, the things that are happening out there. And as a woman, it objectifies women to say that really all it is about looks and defining yourselves. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting, probably because of partisanship. The left didn't want to criticize her too much, but there were some op-eds that came out later saying, well, actually, it's a little more complicated than just biology, kind of trying to, softly correct her because, according to the progressive ideology, you can just feel like a woman, apparently, or like you said, purchase body parts or put on makeup. And I've even seen these spectrums that, again, they hand out in school, going back to the school issue, discussing these things. Rate yourself from Barbie to G.I. Joe. How do you feel? That is so ridiculous. And it actually is reinforcing harmful and untrue gender stereotypes, saying things like, well, if you like Barbie or if you like makeup, that's what makes you a woman. Or, if it's the opposite, that makes you a boy. And what we're taught in the Bible about the importance of man and woman being created by God in the image of God as partners, as co-heirs, to labor together and rule over the earth and steward the earth. That is what it means to be a man and a woman. We can look to the Bible for that truth. And it's powerful. Men and women both have a wonderful, important things to bring, plans that God has for us. And to diminish that to these categories of, that are so superficial, I think maybe 10, 20 years ago, that would have been considered anti-feminist, like you said. But today that's considered feminist in progress, and it's just wrong.
It is, and we're starting to see more people be willing to speak out about that. I put National Review on our website because they had this article calling her out for this. And that's brave of them. I mean, we know we live in a cancel culture. And so don't forget to support news outlets like National Review, like Point of View, where we're going to speak truth and we're going to speak it in love. And, before this last break, I will just highlight I love what you're saying, because what I'm hearing, Liberty, is that it is a loving thing to say you were created woman and man, and that God doesn't make mistakes, and that is good enough. That's a really loving message. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this short break.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to Point of View. I've just been discussing here with Liberty, really some interesting things that came out of Judge Jackson's hearings last week. Of course, we've all heard the moment that came out where she was asked to define a woman, and she said, "I'm not a biologist." We're kind of discussing how, for me, what an overarching theme that we're consistently seeing out of the left and Democrats' policies are that they do harm women. They tout things like, we're pro women's empowerment, but we believe women are obsolete and anyone can become a woman, just whoever wants to be. We love women and want to empower women, but abortion is the only way to do that, which we know abortion really does harm women, let alone the women in the womb who are killed by abortion. And so I just like to draw some of that out from a larger, broader perspective, because it's bigger than just these hearings last week or the next Supreme Court nominee. It's really where we are as a society. Are we going to stand up and say that women deserve better? We're half of society here. We're not this fragmented part of society, and that men, no offense, we love men. I'm raising 3 little men now, but they don't know what it's like to be a woman. They don't know what it's like to be the only woman standing in a boardroom, to be seen often before we're heard, to have, feel uncomfortable walking to our car at night or sometimes in an elevator with somebody. There's these aspects of being a woman, or these experiences that only we have, that are unique to us in society. And they're not all bad. Some of them are really great experiences, but men can't become that. And it's almost offensive to suggest that all they have to do is put on makeup and say they identify as a woman, to really conquer us as our own biological sex. And so, Liberty, I know I just said a lot. Do you have anything to add before I turn to Josh on the topic?
Yes. And, I'm not the pastor here today, so Josh may have some additional thoughts on this. But just, as a Christian and as a woman, I do believe, as I was saying before the break, that, God has big plans for women. We're, not second-class citizens on the earth. We were made for a purpose, and there is so much for us to do and bring to the table, so to speak. And I think that throughout history, you can look and see women have been abused, women have been neglected and put down. And you look at Christianity, that really was for the first time in history raised women up and elevated them to a higher status, which a lot of people don't realize that. But, my point is, throughout history, because God has a special purpose for women, I believe the enemy has tried to attack women by bringing them down. And you see it, in some cultures, it's women literally have no rights whatsoever. But there's always a twist, here on the left or in secular progressivism, you see people saying, oh, well, we're for women's rights. But then all of a sudden you see women's rights being taken over by people who are biologically men. And I think that's just another underhanded way for the enemy to attack women and try to discourage us and keep us from really fulfilling the role that God has for us in society and everything that we do. So, for women out there, we keep preaching the truth. We know that God has a plan for us, and we try to make the world a better place for our sons and daughters someday. So, yeah, that's all I would have to add to that.
That was a great ad, Liberty. Thank you for just cluing us in on that. Josh, I'd love to circle back to you as we round out the discussion on her comments on really the obsoletism of women. But what did you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for me to try to fit all of my thoughts in here, but really, I do think the biggest issue is the issue of losing the idea of truth and logic in our society, and that's going to have repercussions on even the gospel preaching and all those things. But but it's certainly not a minor point what's happening to women, and you would think it would be taking place to men too, but it's not really right now. It's really an assault on women and on the word woman, even though gender dysphoria kind of attacks both genders, both men and women. It seems to be on women, and you know what? When you look at the Bible, when you look at Scripture, women were so important, like so important. If you look at, even Jesus was supported by several wealthy women. Paul was supported by a wealthy woman, Lydia. Women came along, and though they aren't always the most outspoken people in the Scriptures, we wouldn't have the Scriptures today if it weren't for godly, faithful women. And God made women and men different on purpose. Like, there is a reason that they're different. We can't try to blur the lines here and try to say that they're the same. Let's take God's order, and because we're living in His universe, in His world, and let's follow His pattern. And it's such a shame that someone who's looking to be nominated, who's going to be in the highest court of the land, who's supposed to be using logic and reason, cannot even define that a woman is a human female. That is sad to me.
It is. And the other component of this, as people were willing to make a lot of the fact that President Biden openly said, I'm going to nominate a woman and I'm going to nominate someone who is African American. And they made a lot of the fact of her minority status as an African American, but the fact that she is a woman was a part of the reason for the celebration of her being considered for this position in office, because so few women do get the chance to serve on the court. And so did you pick up on that as an irony as well, Josh?
Yeah, no, I thought that I thought that undermined, when she answered the question, I really thought it undermined everything that Biden had claimed he was doing. He said he's putting in a black woman, as a Supreme Court justice, and in fact, she doesn't know what a woman is. But then when she was asked later by Ted Cruz, she says, "Well, I know I'm a woman." And what Ted Cruz should have asked her then was, "How do you know that? You don't know what a woman is. You're not a biologist." So yeah, that certainly wasn't lost on me.
It was interesting. Well, Liberty, do you have anything else you want to add to our discussion? I know we broke this down pretty quickly here, but I'd love your final thoughts on just where we are, or even her nomination process.
Well, I think it's definitely good that you've highlighted these topics today, Chelsey, and it's something that we'll have to watch and see. Something you touched on earlier, that she didn't have a whole lot of experience interpreting the Constitution to really even form a judicial philosophy on constitutional law. So I think that's something concerning. And so we'll see how that plays out. Thankfully, we have a lot of good justices on the court right now. That's something to still be optimistic about, though.
Absolutely. You raise a great point. She is set to fill a liberal position on the court. So this isn't going to change the makeup of the court, is what they call it. We're still going to have, really it's a 5 conservative, 4 liberal court with some swing vote justices in the middle. She's not going to change any of those positions, but it is important to note a few things on her record. Again, that she doesn't necessarily have the record on constitutionalism to carry her weight as a constitutional judge, let alone justice on the Supreme Court. And so that lack of experience, I think, as an attorney is really noteworthy, and one that, of course, all of our elected officials should be looking for when they're going to vote in the upcoming weeks on this. Don't forget to engage and call your elected official about this. That would be your congressman, your representative, or senator from your your senator from your state, because they're going to be the ones ultimately confirming her or not. As always, thank you so much for being with us. Josh, real quick, just tell us where our followers can follow you at.
Yeah, if you go to YouTube and you do a search for The Bible Explained, it'll come right up. We have somewhere around 10,000 subscribers there. And what I do on that channel is just break down questions about the Bible that people have and give simple answers to it. And hopefully you'll find it a great resource.
What an incredible resource. I can't wait to go look. And Liberty, where can they follow you?
You can go to libertymccartor.com and see my writings there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks as always for listening. You can support me and my work at hucoaction.org. Until next time, thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next time.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.